Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today's session, Decisions That Will Make or Break Your Biotech. Today is a bit of a preview for an upcoming ebook that we have, which is designed to guide first-time biotech CEOs to make the important decisions to really help their company succeed. I'm joined by three of the experts today whose insights have helped shape the content in the book, and they've also helped many first-time CEOs navigate the numerous obstacles to help them make the important decisions so their company can survive. Today we have Rudi Erlemann from Medica, Patrik Frei from Venture Valuation, and Carlos Velez from Lacerto Bio. Thank you all for joining us. My name is Kari Bennett, and I own a marketing agency called Arrive Marketing Strategies. A few quick logistics, and then we're going to go ahead and get started. We are recording this session, so you are welcome to share it with anyone after. If you have any questions, there is a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Please drop them there, and we'll get to a few of those at the end. If not, we can provide answers and send those by email. And once the ebook is ready, which is hopefully next week, we will go ahead and follow up with all of you with a PDF of that hard copy. So with that, we're going to go ahead and kick things off with Rudi here from Medica. Rudi, now you often sit down with first-time CEOs, and what advice would you give to somebody who's coming from academia with a great idea and a really, great plan for a successful company? What are the things that you would talk to them about first to really help guide them to make sure everything is structurally set for them to succeed?
Yeah, thank you, Kari. So I think the first advice I would give them is that they need to acknowledge the complexity of drug development, where you have different elements interplaying with each other in a holistic way, if you wish to say like this. So you have the science and the technology on one hand. You have the corporate goal that you need to set out. You need to have the funds in order to execute the study. So you have to go out fundraising. Obviously, you need to evaluate the company in order to have a proper idea on the value that you're generating. And with all of that in place, you actually have to execute and deliver on that plan. So in order to achieve that, the important aspect for a CEO is to build a vision. Why are you doing this? What is the clinical needs that you want to address? What is the goal that you want to achieve? If it's a platform company, what is the business goal that you have in mind? And with that in hand, you will then define the corporate strategy to see how to get to this point. And then obviously you have to write a business plan that is very meaningful and lays out. And obviously it's a work in progress. So the aims will change over time. And then you need to communicate it to potential investors, to media and other outlets. And that means that you have to have a pitch deck that really condenses this idea, your story in a concise manner. And the last point is that you then have to deliver. You have to execute on this plan and put a development plan together that interlocks clinical planning, the preclinical plans, making sure that you have enough CMC material to go forward, and an overarching regulatory strategy to get to this point. And that is my first choice advice. And build a team around that you need to deliver it. So don't reinvent the wheel if you are not coming from the industry. Build your support network of consultants, talk to investors, board members, get as many people's input as possible, and learn from the no's when people tell you no, and then see what is sharpening. Use the nose to sharpen the knife.
That's a really great way to get started here, showing that there's a lot of considerations that are really important. And this is why it's so important that all of these are thought through for a first-time CEO. You kind of ended there a little bit with, talking about the network and how important relationships are. And so with that, I'm just going to transition a little bit to partnerships. And I know that, Carlos, you are working with companies all the time on their partnering strategy. And maybe you can just dive in a little bit deeper into some of the most important advice that you would give them around their partnering strategy.
Well, if a CEO were to come to me and say, Carlos, when should I start looking for a partnership? My answer is always now, immediately, today, yesterday. Why? There are a couple of reasons. A lot of CEOs think that the time to look for a partner is when they have a drug candidate that is in, let's say, phase 2 or whatever. But the reality is that, first of all, it takes a long time to try to meet with potential partners, schedule meetings, and so forth. It could take a year in some cases just to get a 30-minute meeting. So the time to start that process is as soon as possible. The other thing to consider is that, having these meetings, even though you may not have a drug candidate that's ready to license, having those meetings today can provide you with sometimes very valuable feedback. So you may be talking to a potential licensee today, and they may look at what you have. They may offer some suggestions for example, animal studies where they may want to see some data, clinical trial designs, indications. They may point out other competitors in terms of what they're doing. So getting that feedback, especially from a knowledgeable, big pharma prospective licensee, it can be tremendously valuable in helping you think through what your development plan should look like moving forward, going back to Rudy's point. And the other thing I would say is that, even these very early discussions that may initially start with the idea of securing a license, that may lead to something like a research agreement, a feasibility study, something that's maybe not a full license that makes the headline, but maybe it's some sort of research agreement. You collaborate for 3 months, 6 months. It may lead to a license, it may not. But that relationship, that feasibility, that research agreement, whatever the case may be, can provide you with some great data, that maybe you don't have to pay for, which is great. That data can then be used to present to other future investors. It provides validation. So there's every reason under the sun to start the let's call it the partnering process, sooner rather than later. But just recognize that their early that early outreach may not lead to a license, and that's totally fine. It may lead to other benefits that provide a tremendous amount of benefit in the long run. And I'll just say one more thing, which is that going out and looking for partners early in the process, that's something that has to be explained to, let's say, your board of directors and your investors, so that expectations can be managed. They need to understand that if you're going to Bio or Bio Europe or some other conference, you're not going to come back with a check for 50 million. This is a very long process. So managing board and investor expectations is an important part of this as well.
So because this session is, also what not to do, how to make or break your biotech, I'm going to actually throw this out to all of you, and we're going to start with you, Carlos. If there was, what would be the single biggest deal-killing mistake in early negotiations? So if you were sitting on the other side and somebody, did something that you're basically going to walk away and say they're not ready, what advice would you give to tell a first-time biotech CEO not to do in one of these meetings?
Yeah, I would say two things. One is, and I say this all the time, it drives me crazy, quite frankly. A lot of first-time CEOs, especially those that are not from the industry, have a tendency to overvalue the value of their drug candidate. And when I say overvalue, what I still see a lot of is, this idea that a market is worth X dollars, and if we can capture 10% of that market, it's going to be a huge opportunity. And that's a grave mistake. That's something that may work if you're trying to raise money from your Uncle Fred. But when you start talking to sophisticated investors, sophisticated licensees, you're not going to get past that first meeting. What you really should be doing is understanding, what your particular drug candidate looks like from a mechanism of action point of view. How will that mechanism of action compare to not only current standard of care, but future standard of care? Because that's what the licensee is thinking about. They're thinking about how this treatment paradigm will evolve over time. And so understanding all that provides you as a CEO with the opportunity to present, some potential commercial scenarios moving forward. It also influences what your preclinical and clinical drug development plan might look like. So thinking through all those issues and presenting them to a sophisticated investor and a sophisticated licensee, that's what really matters, because that's what they're thinking about. So from a negotiation point of view, to get to your question, the negotiation may center around maybe you want to develop it in this therapeutic area, this indication. The licensee wants to develop it slightly differently, and that's fine. That's great. Nothing wrong with that. So if you have specific ideas and a licensee is keen to do it in something else, then my advice at that point is sign it. Just sign it. Just sign it. You've won the lottery. Licensing is a rare event. Just sign it. If they want to develop it that way, go right on ahead and move on. So, one sort of leads to the other in terms of your plan for developing it, being realistic about where this drug candidate can or can't go, and then ultimately, if the licensee has thoughts about it, yeah, sign it.
Patrick, do
Yeah.
you have any advice to add there?
Yeah, I think that it's a very good point. I mean, at the end, companies have to put themselves in the shoes of the partner, right? What is the pharma looking for, right? It's not about me, but it's at the end you want to do a deal, and the deal needs two parties, and you have to, at the end, you are trying to sell your product or you license your product to the pharma. So you have to understand what is the need of the pharma, what are they looking for. So I think that's often something that maybe is forgotten, and the companies are just looking at, okay, we need to do a deal, and this is and maybe going for a too high value, and for the pharma it doesn't make sense like that, and then maybe from there in terms of the deal making. To be creative, right? At the end of the day, if you understand the other part, you can be creative, and at the end. Often you can find a deal that works for both, that addresses the issue. Maybe your royalties are actually not so important for you, but you need to have the money upfront now. And your investor, anyway, typically a VC investor, they want to have the money coming in rather sooner than later, because they can't wait with their fund until royalties come in. So you have to think in terms of being creative and make it work. And I think maybe thinking a little bit outside the box, you can make such deals happen.
Well, I want to be able to transition to our next topic on fundraising. But first, Rudy, I know sometimes you even wear the investor hat on your side. What is going to make you walk away from the table? Just, something that that you do not want to do if you're sitting in looking for a partner or an investor to come on board.
Well, it's really the lack of planning. It comes down to that.
Yeah. Yep.
People it's very simple. And then the other point is people, they go on a shoestring budget and they assume everything will work out. And that may be the case, but you are probably more likely to win in the lottery because after having run so many programs, I can guarantee you one thing, something will go wrong. I don't know when, I don't know what,
Yeah.
and I don't know the impact. So be prepared for delays. Maybe your chemistry scale up doesn't work smoothly. There is a side effect, whatever it may be prepared and have the open communications in place. But without a plan, there is always a poor planning. You're not prepared for any of that. And investors see that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And with that, I would just add that it's important that you go into those meetings prepared with a really polished pitch deck that tells your story, that is succinct. You don't want a 30-page deck. You need to make sure that you are able to tell your story in 20 minutes and practice internally, practice with other people so that you're going in, really prepared and you're showing that to the potential partner.
And pause and listen.
And
Very
listen.
important.
Yes.
Very
Yes.
important.
Yeah,
Okay,
I
so
think
let's
that's a good
go.
point to listen. Sometimes people go into a meeting and they offload everything, and sometimes it's good just to listen, and you can
Yeah.
learn so much just listening to the other party, and you can adapt a bit to what the other party is looking for instead of just throwing everything out there. So
Yep.
it's a very good
Mhm.
point.
Mhm.
Sorry.
Okay, so let's just dive into a little bit more on the investment side. So from the book, we say, don't approach investors before you are ready. You only get one first impression, and a half-baked pitch closes doors that rarely reopen. And I think that's very true. So Patrick, how can you talk through, share some advice on, what separates a smooth fundraising process from a painful one in the first round?
Yeah, well, I think there is no smooth fundraising process, right? So,
Painful.
but it can be smoother than others. So I think what Rudy already said and Carlos in terms of you have to have a plan, right? If you go talk to
Yeah.
investor, you need to know where you want to go with your company. I mean, how much money do you need? How are you going to spend it? And you should think long term, right? Often we see companies, they just think the next year, the next milestone, but you have to think about the one after that. You're probably going to have to do 2, 3, 4, 5 funding rounds, right? So
Yeah.
you have to
Yeah.
think, what will it take to get there? And you might not do it all the way. You might sell the company before, you might license the product before. But anyway, I think it's very important to have that long-term perspective. So be prepared. When you go to the investor and tell them, show me the money, they will tell you, show me the plan, right? So they want to know how it's going to be invested. And investors, they know that the business plan is never going to play out as you have it written down. It's always going to be different. As Rudy said, something is going to go wrong. But I think it's if you don't have it on a piece of paper and can show where you want to go, then you already, tomorrow it's going to look different. And I think investors want to see kind of this consistency. I think also when you go to an investor and they ask how much money you need and you tell them, well, it depends. I think that's a bad answer.
Yeah.
I think
That's
you
a really
you
bad
have
answer.
to have a plan, and it might be, you might have to adapt it, and you have an investor who gives you more than you need at the moment. That's fine, but you should, have a plan at the moment where how much you need and where to go. Um, then don't be shy to ask for the money. Maybe that's a bit the European thing, but we always think, we can't ask for too much. We ask for a little bit less. No, ask for more, right? Ask for the money you need plus a little bit extra, but right? And because again, something will go wrong, and so you have to make sure you will get to the next milestone. The worst thing is if you have to go raise money before you actually get to this next milestone.
Mm.
Then it's going to take time. It's not something that is going to be overnight. So you can't go to a conference and expect a check to get, like with the partnering, you're not going to get that $50 million or $10 million or $5 million check tomorrow, right? It's going to take time. The best time to talk to investors is when you don't need their money. If you go to an investor and you tell them, at the moment, I don't need your money, that's when they want to talk to you. Then that's when they're interested. Right? And
Yeah.
you have to start early, build the relationship,
Yeah.
tell them at the moment we don't need money, we have non-diluting funding, but next year I'm going to do a Series A, I'm going to raise 20 million, and I would like to kind of keep in touch. That's the right approach, I think.
Yeah, and I just want to, reiterate something that Rudy said earlier, which is that, this is exactly why, like Rudy said, networking and meeting people is so important because if you're a first-time CEO, clearly you don't know everything. You have no idea how much it's going to cost to scale up your API. You have no idea how much it's going to cost to make clinical batches. You have no idea, and that's totally fine. But that's when you should be, talking to service providers, talking to consultants, talking to people who know, and a lot of that feedback, can be weaved into the plan so that when you do present your budget to a potential investor, you can tell the investor, yeah, it's going to cost this. I didn't come up with this number. This is a number that was provided to me by a service provider. It may be higher, maybe lower, maybe wrong, maybe it's another way to do it, whatever the case may be. But at least you have a realistic, practical number. And most investors and licensees will appreciate that, even if they disagree with you. They'll at least appreciate the fact that it's a real number. So network, network, network.
Yeah. And
That
on that note, just don't talk or go into meetings. Have a structured follow-up approach. So invest into a contract
Mm.
relationship management system, into a CRM. So you meet so many people, maybe somewhere in a coffee shop, maybe in a partnering meeting, you have different advice. One wants them to follow up in 3 months. The other one that they sent me your pitch deck and maybe we can talk next Bio Europe. Be structured, know with whom you spoke about what and what was the outcome. Because otherwise, if you go into a meeting and you don't have a proper follow-up and track this, it's a waste of money and time.
so to follow up on building the partnerships, getting the funding, let's talk a little bit about the executional side. And Rudy, I'm going to throw this one back at you because you're working with a lot of
Yeah.
experts on the regulatory side that can really help move preclinical studies forward. And, there's always pressure to, conserve money and speed up timelines, but you have to be really careful because you can make critical mistakes during this time as well. So maybe you can just speak a little bit to, some advice that you'd provide and why it's so important that, CEOs are working with people who have real expertise in these areas and that they're considering that as they're, moving forward in their planning.
Yeah, the bringing it back to the point Carlos made is the clinical indication that you're going after. Are you going for an orphan drug designation? What is a different plan? So, with that in mind, you are developing your regulatory strategy, and your preclinical strategy really depends on your first clinical indication. You want to be ready for an IND, and then that leads into all the rest of the preclinical planning, making sure that you have enough drug substance available to conduct these studies. We see it still so many times people don't produce enough material. They're not ready to have the material shipped to the CRO because they forget if it's a small molecule, relatively safe, they forget that you have to go up to the highest feasible dose. So you need a lot of material. If you go for inhalation, you need kilograms, plenty of kilograms to go forward. Conversely, if you have a cytotoxic drug, for example, you don't need much into material for the clinical study or for the preclinical safety assessment, but you need a lot for CMC because you need to have stability assessment. And this is a complexity that you have to keep in mind. Another important element is the selection of the suitable species. If you have a metabolite profile that are missing on a small molecule, you may be put on a clinical hold because you missed a major metabolite. Conversely, if you're working with biologics, you have to show that these species that you're looking at are relevant. And if the rodent, for example, is not relevant and it's only the NHP that is relevant, well, make a strong scientific argument, go to the authorities and speak to them and say, hey, maybe we only need a single species because the others are irrelevant. Talking about the regulatory authorities, if you work on a small molecule, a simple project, maybe you get around it, but otherwise communicate early and frequently with the regulatory authorities to get their buy-in into your plans because your plan is great, but if they don't agree with you, then you're lost. And this gives you also a lot of credibility with the FDA, with the potential investors that you say, hey, we had a successful pre-IND meetings. This is the outcome. These are the points that were raised. We addressed them and we are ready to move forward.
Carlos, Patrik, do you guys have anything you wanted to add there?
I had a client a few years ago who ran into a metabolite issue, and it cost him 12 plus months. It's not a trivial issue. Yep.
Yeah, and the manufacturing is something also for investors, besides having to do it, you also need the money to do it, right? So that's also something that we came across.
Yeah, it's interesting. Both of you should be raising, CMC issues because it's definitely something that, we're seeing a lot more of over the past few years where CMC issues are cropping up, even from big pharma companies in some cases. And I suspect what's happening, this is my hypothesis, that, a lot of small companies, they're budget constrained, they're focused so much on getting those efficacy signals and demonstrating safety that they're, perhaps so sidestepping, let's say, some CMC issues, but yet when they go to the regulators, to Rudy's point, now they're running into CMC issues, which is not the problem you want to have. And so again, it goes back to what we've been saying over and over for the past 20 minutes is having a realistic plan, having a realistic budget, talking to people who know what they're doing, and having a comprehensive plan so that you can maybe not avoid all these issues, but at least you're less likely to have some of these problems moving forward.
So I actually had a question come in, and I think it's very timely with all the conferences that are coming up at the start of the new year around the JP Morgan Annual Healthcare Week. So I'm not going to go into, it's a pretty long question. I'm not going to go into the details about the but it's a biotech startup and they have some new data that's very compelling, and think that they can have some interest in attending, but they're wondering, should they go back to JPM this year? Should they pitch at Resi? Should they go to Biotech Showcase, or just focus on non-dilutive funding to advance their project? So from that perspective, I mean, I know we're all going to be in San Francisco that week. Does anybody have any advice about like where a biotech startup what might be the most appropriate fit for them?
Well, to go, I mean, if you raise money, I think JPM is the place to be, right? I mean, if you, it also depends, you know, how much money you're raising and from whom. But I think it's definitely something worthwhile to consider, and go there. I mean, non-dilutive funding, I think that's great if you can get that. Typically, you will not move as fast as if you work with investors and, you know, with the network. And so it depends also a bit on the strategy, and that's something else. You know, what is the strategy of the company? So that really depends. If you go to JP Morgan, I mean, then network like crazy, like Carlos did, and said, you know, go to as many different events, and, you know, go to one or two of the bigger, you know, Biotech Showcase or Resi. I think those are the ones that you know, where you can go either present or do the one-to-one meetings with investors, and it depends again how much money you raise.
And be sure to look for like a startup rate, because depending on there usually is a lower fee that is available for startups depending on how much funding you have initially. So it might be more attainable, because the conferences can be kind of expensive, but there's value just even being in the city and going to the parties, because it's a great way to network and meet people if you can afford the hotels.
Yeah,
the question was also raised around orphan drug designation and being funded. A big value by talking to investors, coming back to the original plan. Just because you get non-dilutive financing, does it really mean that that program is worthwhile pursuing? Because in the end of the day, you still want to out-license. So yes, you get the money to do the work, but are you actually developing something for which you have a market? And orphan drugs, it's a very unique case. So by speaking to investors, find somebody who will tell you, hey, you know, do this work, come back to me with positive results. I'm really, really interested to move forward. At least you know that there's a potential buyer. But if you don't have a buyer, you may spend 2 years working on a project that will not live longer.
You know, that's such an important point that Rudy's raising. It's sort of it may seem like a nuance, but it passes by a lot of first-time CEOs, which is that just because a program is getting, you know, non-dilutive grant funding, you know, from government or private sources, that's great. But at the end of the day, is what you're developing actually something that's licensable? Is actually something that the market wants? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe that's a program that's validation for your underlying platform, in which case, yes, there may be some value there, but maybe not for this first drug candidate. Maybe it's for subsequent drug candidates. And if you still don't believe what we're saying, look at how many drug candidates for the treatment of COVID are still available for licensing. A lot of them.
Yeah.
For lower price.
We've
For
only
low price.
We only have a minute left, so why don't we go ahead and close with each one of you, you know, if you want to just kind of leave one final thought that, you know, a piece of advice for a first-time biotech CEO to take away from this session. And of course, we'll have a lot more details in the ebook, which we will share after this. But why don't we go ahead and start with you, Patrik, and then we'll go around and thank everybody for joining us. So.
Yeah, so I think you have to be very optimistic and you have to believe in yourself. Rudy mentioned all the things, you know, at the beginning, what you need, but for all of that, you really have to believe in what you do is the right thing. And you will get, you know, you talk to a lot of people and everybody will tell you something different. At the end, you also have to believe and stick to your vision and where you want to go, and you have to believe in your product, in your company.
Carlos.
Having not only a well-defined understanding of what, you know, the standard of care is today, but how the standard of care may evolve over time, and being able to describe your potential product positioning in current and against future standard of care. And answer B, from my perspective, will be, if you could present a story around a drug candidate that has multiple phase 2 opportunities, that's great. You want to have those multiple shots on goal with one candidate. That's the ideal scenario. So if you can do that, great. You can build your story, build your development plan around that.
Okay, and finally, Rudy, what's your piece of advice?
Well, I already mentioned to prepare for problems and failures. But very importantly, network. Gets the right advisors on board, builds the right team that brings the right technical knowledge to the table, but also which fits culturally to you. You need to be open to communicate. Communication and network is key.
If Connor is still on, maybe he can throw the screen back up just so that everybody can see our names and our companies. Please connect with us on LinkedIn. Feel free to send us some questions in the chat here. We would love to connect with you, as Rudy and Carlos and Patrik reiterated. Networking is so important. You're all part of the digital partnering system. Go in and start building relationships this week. And hopefully we see you all in San Francisco. With that, thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you again soon. And Patrik, thank you for hosting this as part of the
Thank you.
digital partnering event.
Thank you, Patrik.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Rudy. Thanks, Carlos.
Bye-bye.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.